You didn't come here by chance. I sense it in your halting breath, in the gaze that, though unseen by others, quietly seeks understanding. You are weary, not so much from what you've done, but from the parts of yourself you've never dared to face, the things you hide behind your smile, the truths you hold back in silence, and above all, in the wounds you've never shown to anyone, not even yourself. I'm not here to offer advice. I'm not here to heal you. That power belongs to no one. But I'm here to remind you of something, as if I were a part of you, the part you've long forgotten. Pain is not your enemy. It is a voice. Perhaps you've spent years striving to appear strong. You've strained to be the dutiful child, the understanding friend, the resilient colleague. You've become a statue of the spirit, beautiful on the outside, but hollow and cold within. You no longer cry, but is there anything left that moves you to tears? You no longer rage, but do you still feel worthy of anger? Let me tell you this, not as a doctor, not as a philosopher, but as someone who has faced their own abyss. You don't hurt because you're weak. You hurt because you've been strong for so long that your soul is now demanding its right to breathe, to be present, to be seen. You think your pain comes from the harm others have caused you, their words, their indifference, their rejection, but those are merely echoes. The true wound lies within you, and it's not there because you're wrong, but because a part of you has never been heard. As I once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate and true. So today, I'm not asking you to change. I'm not inviting you to step out of the darkness. I'm only inviting you to pause, to sit still and to listen. What is your pain whispering in the silent mirror of your inner self, who is reflected on the other side? You believe that if you're good enough, strong enough, loving enough, the world will stop hurting you. You believe that if you can control everything, your emotions, your actions, your image, you'll be safe, and perhaps for years. You've lived this way, caring for others before they can hurt you, yielding before you're rejected, pleasing before you're forgotten. But now you're exhausted, not because you were wrong, but because you're fighting a deeper, unseen law that we don't master the world through control, but through understanding. Here, where your consciousness begins to crack, you're being offered a choice to keep living as a machine of the mind, trying to manage every fluctuation, or to stop and ask, what am I really trying to control? As I once said, what you resist not only persists, but will grow in size. When you try to avoid pain, you don't make it disappear, you give it new forms. In tension, in conflict, in unexplained anger, you believe that by controlling your words, your behavior, your emotions, you can avoid uncertainty. But uncertainty doesn't come from outside. It comes from what you haven't yet understood within. We carry a fear that if we don't control everything, it will all fall apart. But perhaps it's already broken. The sturdy shell you built to shield yourself from the world is now suffocating your soul. That shell is the illusory ego, the self-deceived identity that believes if you're polished enough, enduring enough, controlled enough, you'll be loved. You cannot control how others see you, but you can learn to see yourself differently, with a gaze that doesn't judge, a gaze that says, I see the fear in me and I no longer blame it. Not because you don't hurt, because of what others do to you. You hurt because their actions touch a wound already within you, and there's nothing wrong with that wound. It's only asking to be seen. As I once said, suffering is not an illusion. It is the truth that demands transformation. No transformation can happen while you believe you can control everything to avoid pain. The reality is, you will still hurt, but the difference lies in what you choose to do with that pain. Retreat into the shell of control. Or take a small step toward the darkness within, where the parts of you you've never dared to face are waiting. I'm not saying this to frighten you. I'm saying this so you can begin to be free. Because the first thing you must let go of is not others, not the world, but the illusion that you can control how others hurt you. The truth is, you can only control one thing: whether the wound within you remains hidden. If you have the courage to look at it, light will begin to seep in. That is the beginning of true freedom. There's a moment in every soul's journey that no one can avoid. It's when explanations no longer suffice, techniques lose their effect, and every reason you've used to maintain control starts to dissolve. That's the moment you stand at the edge of the forest. Not a literal forest, but the forest of your own being. A spiritual space where the light of consciousness cannot reach, and everything you've ever avoided waits. You stand at the forest's edge, and you know, if you step inside, there will be no map, no signs, no companions. But you also know, if you don't enter, you'll forever live at the edge where fear, repetition, and the unconscious rule beneath the guise of "I'm fine." And I call that place the unconscious. But don't be mistaken. It's not vague or abstract. The unconscious has form, voice, and memory of its own. It's the dwelling place of ancient images, archetypes that humanity has carried since the dawn of time. The devouring mother, the lone wanderer, the wounded hero, the abandoned child. Each symbol within you holds an unsolved dream, a call from your soul, demanding that you look. You cannot analyze the forest from the outside. You must step inside with the reverence of entering an ancient cathedral no one has ever mapped. And there, the first thing you meet is not an enemy, but yourself, the version of you that was left behind, rejected, imprisoned. Remember this: everything you've ever despised in others is a mirror reflecting what you haven't accepted in yourself. As I wrote, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. The betrayer, the cold one, the weak child, they are not outsiders. They are symbols knocking at the door within you, demanding attention, and the forest is not silent. It whispers. It calls you through dreams you don't want to remember, through memories not stored in words, but in feelings, unexplained anxiety, baseless anger, strange urges pulling you against your will. These are not psychological problems. They are messages. You are not broken, you are being summoned. The unconscious is calling you home. You see light within the forest, but it doesn't come from outside. It comes from the cracks in your fear, from the deepest point of your wounds. As I once described, in each of us there is another whom we do not know. He speaks to us in dreams and tells us how differently he sees us. This is the moment to stop running. Not because you're no longer afraid, but because you understand that everything you fear, if left unaddressed, becomes your jailer. But if you dare to listen, it becomes your guide. Step into the forest, not with preparation, but with presence, not with weapons, but with reverence. For in that forest, you will meet yourself again. And that self doesn't wish to harm you. It only wants to be seen, heard, and loved. Only after passing through that forest can you say, I am no longer controlled by the darkness. I walk with it, and you've entered the forest. You've walked through fear, encountered nameless memories, images that once made you shudder, but you realized they didn't kill you. They only asked you to stop, to sit, to look, to listen. And now, after the inner screams have risen and fallen, a silence emerges. Not the silence of paralysis, but of transformation. This is when you stop fighting the shadow and begin to converse with it. I call this the turning point in the journey of individuation, when the ego stops trying to control the darkness and instead invites it to sit, as if welcoming a guest long exiled in the basement of your soul. You look at the shadow, and for the first time, you don't say, "I must eliminate it." You say, "I understand why you're here." 0. The shadow, the part of you rejected for its anger, envy, shame, or weakness, is now named, and something strange happens. When you look directly at it, it's no longer a monster. As I once said, the shadow is a tight passage, a narrow door, whose painful constriction no one is spared, who goes down to the deep well. Everyone who seeks true growth must pass through that narrow door. No one emerges unscathed, but it's precisely because you're no longer whole that you become whole. Integrating the shadow isn't a pleasant reconciliation. It's an inner ritual like alchemy, where the chaotic raw material, prima materia, is boiled in the furnace of the soul. You sit within yourself, facing the parts you once despised, felt ashamed of, cursed, and you say, "I am you." 2. Not everything in the shadow is to be loved, but everything in the shadow must be acknowledged. As I wrote in the Red Book, I must learn that the dregs of my being are the foundation of my wholeness. The mud forms the solid ground to walk on. The lowest parts of you hold the seeds of light, and you begin to see the things that once tormented you were actually trying to protect you. The anger that erupted like a storm came because you were too silent. The envy that shamed you stemmed from an unheard longing. The shadow isn't a demon, it's a starved part of your soul. It doesn't rebel to destroy you. It screams because it hasn't been named in too long. And now you name it: fear, anger, the feeling of abandonment, the need to be loved. None of these names deserve to be cast out. No emotion is wrong. You begin to dream differently. No longer dreams filled with darkness and pursuers, but images of reunion. A path leading to a place you've never been, yet your soul recognizes. A child steps out from the bushes, smiling at you. A former enemy looks at you like family. Dreams become a dialogue with the parts of yourself you'd forgotten. This is the process of individuation, not becoming perfect, but becoming whole. As I said, I would rather be whole than good. You stop trying to do what's right, you do what's real. You stop living for an image, you live for your essence. And when this happens, a new center forms within you, not the ego, not the social mask, not what others want you to be, but the self, the true essence, the intersection of conscious and unconscious, darkness and light. The whole self doesn't need you to be perfect. It needs you to be real. It doesn't ask you to banish the shadow. It asks you to invite it to the soul's feast as an honored guest. At that moment, you're no longer a victim of your emotions. You become the master of your inner house. Not because you control everything, but because you've learned to welcome everything. You once believed invulnerability meant being unharmed by others. Now you understand it means no one can touch the part of you that you fully embraced within. You once thought strength was never falling. Now you know it's the ability to fall completely, not into chaos, but into yourself. After the journey through the forest of the unconscious, After sitting and conversing with the shadow, something shifts without proclamation. No bells ring, no revelations descend from the heavens. Only a new stillness emerges within you, a center from which you are no longer swayed by every external noise. I call this center the self, the whole essence, not the ego, always anxious about maintaining an image. Not the social mask, always proper, lovable, good enough. The whole self doesn't need praise or fear, rejection. It only needs to be, and when it is, you become someone who lives from within, no longer pulled by external movements. Now, when someone criticizes you, you don't chatter, not because you're hardened, but because you know the part they touched has been seen, named, and brought into the light. There are no blind spots for others to tread on. You still feel, but you no longer melt into your emotions. You still hurt, but you no longer panic in your pain. You've stopped living as someone perpetually affected because you found an unmoving center. And that center doesn't lie in any beautiful image you tried to build. It doesn't come from knowledge or confidence. It comes from acceptance. As I wrote, wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration. And this wholeness, now you feel not as a concept, but in every breath. It's how you stand in a room full of people without needing attention. It's how you recognize your pain without needing to flee. It's how you refuse what doesn't fit without guilt. It's the return. The center within you now is not a rigid fortress, but a soft glow, like a still lake. Nothing can disturb. Every external movement, praise or criticism, is just a ripple, and you no longer live on the surface of those ripples. You live from the depths. From there, you're no longer forced to react. You choose to respond. You no longer fear getting lost, because you found a home no map can point to, but only your soul recognizes. You stop chasing. Must be right. Must be better. Must be recognized. Those sounds now echo from a distance, no longer able to unsettle you, because you found a voice within calm, clear, needing no shout to be heard. That is the voice of the self. The whole self doesn't need to win. It only needs to be honest. The whole self doesn't need safety. It only needs to be present. The whole self doesn't need to be love to exist. It is love itself, because it contains all of you, even the parts you once rejected. From that center, you see the world differently. No more enemies, no more roles, no more need to prove, only presence, full and empty at once. And in that moment, something strange happens. What once caused you pain no longer holds power, not because it's gone, but because you've stopped giving it power through resistance, fear, or denial. True invulnerability doesn't come from armor. It comes from a nakedness that no longer needs to hide. You haven't become cold. You become inwardly strong. You haven't built a shield. You've become someone who needs no shield, because nothing in you is rejected anymore. You've traveled far, so far that your footsteps no longer echo on the ground, but in your soul, so far that when you look back, you see the many yous you once were, versions that strain to be accepted, loved, deemed good enough. But now you realize what remains to release is not fear, not pain, but the very thing you thought was you. And that's the hardest to let go. That is the persona. I call the persona a mask of the collective psyche, the mask you wear to survive in the social world, to be kind, professional, agreeable, likable. But what I say next cuts to the core. The persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself, as well as others, think one is. Even you believed in that mask, even you forgot it was just a role. And like all roles, it must eventually end. But this ending doesn't happen to applause. It unfolds in a silent room where you stand alone before a mirror and see a reflection that no longer matches the feeling within. You suddenly feel estranged from the good self you built, not because it's false, but because it's depleted, it can no longer contain you. You realize the image you preserve, the strong one, the successful one, the one who always knows what to do, has become a prison. No one forced you into it. You build it yourself, with expectations, responsibilities, and the longing to be easily loved. And so, you cannot escape through external action. Only an inner dissolution opens the door to freedom. Dissolution isn't failure. It's like shedding skin, like a cocoon breaking open when what's inside is ripe. You're not giving up yourself. You are letting go of an image of yourself to live more truly. As I wrote, individuation requires the dissolution of the persona, and this doesn't happen in a single moment. It's like the tide receding slowly, uncontrollably, carrying away the wreckage of what you clung to. The pain comes not because it's wrong, but because you once loved it as essential to survival. You don't know who you are without trying to impress. You don't know who you are without striving to be okay. You don't know who you are without checking what others think of you. But then, after all this, you realize every time you choose silence over reaction, you let the mask fall every time you dare say, I don't know, I'm tired, I need space. You peel away a layer. Every time you're in a room without needing to be liked, you allow yourself to exist without the social mask. And in that moment, something miraculous happens. You don't disappear. You emerge, a being without a name, but one that's lived in you all along. Not perfect, not always certain, not immune to pain, but real. Real enough to need no one's validation. Real enough to be vibrant in silence. Real enough to feel for the first time free, not because you've become better, but because you've stopped pretending. You stand before the mirror, no longer seeing the image you crafted, but eyes that know who you are. Even if they can't name it, the dissolution of the social mask isn't collapse, it's a homecoming. Rebirth doesn't require a baptism. It requires the courage to accept you're no longer the familiar image. It requires you to say, I no longer live to fit you, or the image I thought was me. I live to truly live. And you're no longer a role. You are life unfolding through you. And that is rebirth. It's time to return to the path you left behind. Not a path in the world, but the inner path, where a part of you waits, has been waiting for so long. Not impatient, not reproachful, just waiting as if time doesn't exist for it. As if the moment you return, everything can begin again. Uninterrupted. As I wrote in the Red Book, the soul demands your attention, otherwise it becomes destructive. The part of your soul you've forgotten doesn't vanish, it waits, but the longer it's ignored, the sadder, lonelier, angrier it becomes. It turns into strange dreams, baseless emotions, urges you don't understand, not to punish you, but to be called back. Do you remember the last time you were truly innocent, not forced, cheer, not laughter strained at a party, but the feeling of belonging to yourself without effort, without proof? Maybe it was when you were a child, playing alone with dry leaves in the yard. Maybe it was the first time you spoke your mind without fear of being disliked. Or the moment you looked up at the night sky and felt small but never insignificant. That part, the part that dreamed, that dared to love, that wasn't afraid of being flawed, is what you lost to live correctly. To be accepted, to become an adult, but now with the social mask dissolved, with the shadow integrated, you begin to hear that faint call again, sometimes in dreams, sometimes when you sit alone in silence, no longer straining a wordless call, yet full of meaning. Remember me, and you begin to recall. You remember the emotions you locked away because adults said, don't cry, you must be strong. Low. You remember the dreams extinguished because someone laughed and said, that's unrealistic. Low. You remember the moments you wanted to be seen, loved, held, but instead you learned to suppress, to praise yourself, to endure alone. Now, you don't just recall, you begin to dialogue. I call this active imagination a deliberate method to bring unconscious archetypes into the light through conversation with them. You sit, close your eyes, and ask, who calls me from deep within my soul? Perhaps you see a child, perhaps a gentle feminine figure, anima, or a majestic masculine on a animus, perhaps a half-human, half-beast creature, or a friend you thought you'd forgotten. Whoever it is, trust that this image carries a message. I am the part of you that you rejected to be loved. Yeah. I am the voice silenced to keep you safe. Yeah. I am what you truly long for, but labeled naive, foolish, unrealistic. And now that part doesn't blame you. It only wants to be heard. It wants you to sit silent and listen as if to an old song, sad, tender, full of regret. But the only music that can bring you back to yourself. You begin to write. You record the dialogues from dreams, the images that arise in meditation, the strange emotions that surge without name. You no longer fear being seen as odd, strange, weak. You know this is a sacred ritual, reuniting with your soul after a long exile. You apologize to that part. You ask, what do you need to return? And it answers, live without leaving me behind again. Oh, from here, you don't need to seek answers out there. You don't need to go anywhere to find wholeness. You only need to remember that everything is already within you. And that forgotten part of your soul, though once sad, angry, destructive, is now smiling because you've chosen to return. You no longer live alone. You become a unified whole, not by eliminating weakness, but by loving it, not by rejecting darkness, but by bringing light to it. And that is what individuation truly brings, not a better you, but a homecoming, nothing more to add, nothing left to remove, no part delete, no image to uphold, no one left for you to play, only you, naked as a soul, stepping out of a lifelong slumber. You've passed through pain, not by avoiding it, but by walking through it. You faced the shadow, removed the mask, embraced the forgotten child, reunited with the abandoned soul. And now, in the silence, after the storm, something has been restored, like a small sacred stone at the center of your chest. No one can touch that stone. It doesn't glow, isn't mystical, needs no display, but it's yours, a promise between you and yourself. A promise that needs no declaration, nor binding. A covenant felt only like an underground stream in your consciousness. flowing quietly, but never running dry. I call this moment the emergence of the whole self as an inner reality. Not a belief, but a living, independent, eternal truth. The whole self doesn't speak in human language, but it's present as a new rhythm of breath, deeper, steadier, unmoved by praise or rejection. From here, you no longer live by fleeting impulses. You live by a quiet understanding that every action, decision, choice is an expression of this unseen commitment. You no longer see the world with old eyes. No more dividing friend from foe, no more chasing right or wrong. You see the world as a vast mirror, not to fix yourself, but to reflect the depth you've reached. And when something in life stirs you a glance, a dream, a morning bird's song, you no longer react. You listen as if the universe speaks in a language you finally learned. The covenant with your true self isn't a resolution. It doesn't need daily renewal. It needs to be lived in how you walk, in how you listen to others without rushing to fix them, in how you speak your truth, not to win, not to prove, but to keep yourself from breaking within, in how you touch your hand gently without possession. This covenant is also in how you accept repetition, failure. The moments you still feel fear, but you no longer blame, you only whisper, I'm still here. And that whisper is the most beautiful vow. You need no external ritual, no temple, nor certification, for you've performed the most sacred ritual, the awakening of consciousness. You need no witnesses. But if someone stood before you now, they'd sense, you need say nothing, yet something in you makes them feel, perhaps they too want to return to themselves. That is the power of one who has made a covenant. As I wrote, individuation is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming whole. That wholeness doesn't shine. It's stilled. It doesn't flaunt. It's deep, and like seeds in the earth, it holds all the potential of true life. From here, you don't need reasons to live. Each day is a ritual. Each presence is sacred. Each breath is gratitude. You've returned not to a better image, but to something truer, true enough that it needs no name, only to be lived. And in that act, without fanfare, without declaration, you've entered the final stage of transformation, living as one who knows who they are and no longer needs to convince anyone to believe it. You haven't become a superhero. You've become human. But a human whole